Welcome to Tahanto News. We have lots to talk about today, starting with John Marshall. Thank you. Thank you for coming, John.
Yeah, no problem.
So, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm Chief of Justice in the Supreme Court. I'm a strict federalist who believes in federal law is superior to state law. I take a federalist interpretation of the Constitution and I use it to give Congress the power to charter banks and to give greater power to the national government.
Interesting. And so, what does Marshall Court encourage for this?
Marshall Court encourages the development of large, spaced-out business corporations. We do this by freeing the business corporations from meddling of the states.
Wow, great. So, why don't you want the states to meddle?
Because the corporations are spaced out between states. If an issue arises, who would be the middle ground for the states, the government?
Oh, thank you. Okay. John Marshall, everybody. So up next, we have President Monroe. Thank you for joining us, Mr. President.
Thank you for having me.
So, President Monroe, it's been heard there are threats from European powers to encourage and help Spain to take over the newly independent Latin American colonies. What are your thoughts on this, and what are you going to do to stop this?
Yes, as many of you know, the European powers are using Spain to take over these new colonies, which is not what we want. We want to protect these colonies. So I, along with Adams, am eager to protect all these new republics. I'm now working with Adams on a new foreign policy. It's a doctrine, and it's going to be called the Monroe Doctrine.
Wow. Hope it works out. So what will this doctrine do for us?
Well, this doctrine will respond to all the threats of the European powers, and it will hopefully protect all these new independent colonies. It will keep the European powers out of Latin America. And although the British want to protect these republics as well, it will be just the U.S. for this.
Will anyone else other than the U.S. be involved?
No, we want to keep it just us and keep a lot of the other people out of it.
So, will we need to do anything in return in order to issue the European powers to agree with this document?
With this document, the U.S. has agreed to and promised to stay out of all European affairs so that when they're out of our affairs, we're out of theirs.
And last question. So this Monroe Doctrine will fix all of our problems, you're saying?
This doctrine definitely will show our nation's want and desire for power. However, with no army and no navy, it's going to be very hard to enforce this doctrine. And it's also been decided that the colonies will keep their independence. However, they'll be doing it with the British colonies.
All right, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Breaking news in art and literature. Artists are trying to spread a message about America's landscapes. And now in literature, James Cooper creates his own genre. He has become the first American to do so as a career. His genre is known for expressing pride in our nation's potential. Up next, we have Henry Clay. Good to see you, Henry.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Clay, why do you believe that the American system is what's best for this country?
Well, I believe the American system will help make use of all the roadways and the channels, making it easier for us to spread goods, and it'll help boost our economy, which makes our nation stronger.
Interesting. So, why do you favor in the reestablishment of a national bank?
Well, because having a national bank will keep all of our money in the same place, which makes it easier to track, and it'll make it easier to control and keep it safe.
Thank you, Mr. Clay, for joining
It
us.
was my pleasure.
Up next, we have Andrew Jackson. Good to see you, Andrew. So, who is in control of the Florida territory?
Spain was in control, but their control over it was so weak that they had to give up their claims to the territory. And in 1819, they sold Florida to the United States.
Wow. So our territory is spreading fast, right?
Yeah.
So who's in control of the Pacific Coast Territory?
Well, in 1818, the U.S. and Britain, we decided to share the territory. And in 1821, the Adams-Honest Treaty ended Spain's claims to that territory.
Interesting. Who are the Seminoles?
They're an American Indian group that Spain didn't like because they were keeping their slaves, like they helped their slaves that escaped. And I led a force into Florida to fight those.
Andrew Jackson, everybody. And lastly, all the way from Alabama, Mr. Farmer. Welcome, Mr. Farmer. Thank you for joining us. I know it was difficult for you to come while we're in this devastating panic.
Thank you for having me. When the Panic of 1819 ended in 1821, I thought it was all over, but then we were hit by the current one, which started in 1837. The interconnection between enterprises has recently flourished, causing a boom and bust economy.
What do you mean by boom and bust?
Boom refers to the high consumer demands that encourage owners of farms and factories to expand their production. Bust refers to the production that exceeds consumers' demands, which then causes prices to fall, cutbacks in production, factories and farms to close, and then workers are fired, which then leads for the cycle to just continue on and on.
Wow. Nowadays, the reliance on the national market is overwhelming. Hopefully, the 1850s will bring prosperity and panics will cease, but until then, we don't know. Thank you, Mr. Farmer. And good night.